Viewers, welcome to News Hour Agenda. I'm Madhavdas G. 7 bombers, 14 bombs and 19 hours from takeoff to the strike. It was the dead of the night and an entire nation was sleeping in Iran. But the US stealth bombers pulled off a midnight strike. It was a hammer blow on Iran's nuclear ambitions with massive airstrikes on their 3 nuclear facilities, Natanz, Fordo and Isfahan. Now, the United States claims to have obliterated all the 3 facilities, but the focus is on Fordo, one of the nuclear facilities in Iran that was believed to be out of reach for most militaries across the world, simply because of how deep underground it was situated. State-of-the-art military equipment, including B-2 stealth bombers carrying GBU-57 bunker buster bombs, were used in this operation, and the US claims it has completely obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. However, the US says it's still open for dialogue and hopes that Iran accepts their deal. But Tehran has made it clear the time for diplomacy is over.
A short time ago, the US military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do.
This mission was not and has not been about regime change. The president authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
The warmongering and lawless administration in Washington is solely and fully responsible for the dangerous consequences and far-reaching implications of its act of aggression.
But viewers, how is Iran planning to retaliate? While military action may soon be on the cards, what Iran plans to do immediately could have larger ramifications on the global crude oil supply chain. Iranian parliament is preparing to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and this could effectively cripple the global oil supply chain. Let's tell you why exactly. If this happens, this is the kind of situation we're looking at. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz right here, right between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Why is this important? Because the world's most strategically important area, it serves as a primary export route for most of what the Gulf produces over here. Most of the Gulf countries, UAE, Saudi, etc., Kuwait, all dependent on this route, and therefore 20% of the world's daily oil consumption passes through this very narrow strait, the Strait of Hormuz. And that's what makes this so important, because it's very close to where India is geographically speaking. Although we have diversified where we buy oil from, still this is going to have an impact as far as global oil prices are concerned, and that's why this is very, very significant. If this does happen, why is this so significant, and what really are the options as far as India is concerned? India has turned to alternative sources in May 2025, it is 1.96 million barrels per day. That is, of course, the oil import from Russia. In June 2025, we have seen it go up to 2.2 million barrels per day. So increasing oil purchase from Russia on one hand, oil imports from the US. In May 2025, 0.28 million barrels per day. In June 2025, that goes up to 0.43 million barrels per day. So oil import from the US as well as Russia, that has increased as far as India is concerned, and therefore India at some level or the other should be able to ward off at least some of the impact of this, although perhaps all countries will have to bear the brunt of it in some way or the other if Iran does shut down these straits. Let's quickly take this across to our guests and introduce them. With us is Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of the ORF. With us also is Taraktar, former Director of National Security Council. Joining joining us is Elon Levi, former Israel government spokesperson. Asif Ramiz-Daoudi is a foreign policy expert, leans towards Iran. Dr. Richard L. Benkin is an author and journalist. Also joining us is Raymond Vicky, senior associate from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, as well as former Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Sushant, let me begin with you. Whether Iran goes ahead and does this or not is anybody's guess. The parliament has approved it. It's up to the National Security Council now. But there are going to be ramifications for not just India, but for perhaps the world to pay in terms of oil prices if this does actually happen on ground or rather at sea.
Yeah, Madhav, not just oil prices. I think it will also have an impact on supplies of oil, whether oil will actually be available. If 30% or thereabouts of the oil supply is going to get affected because you can't transport that oil, or at least a substantial portion of that oil, it is going to cause global shortages. And of course, one impact will be felt in prices. But more than prices, it is the availability of oil. And many economies, including ours, run on oil. So yes, it will have a significant impact. It will also have an impact on the countries of the region, because if they can't start transporting their oil, then, how do they manage their own finances? At the same time, I think there will be others who will, of course, reap a windfall. These are the countries like maybe an Angola or an Indonesia or some of the other countries which are not going to be held hostage to this particular waterway. But other than that, I think there would also be a lot of pressure then, which could be mounted on the protagonists to come to some kind of a solution, because everybody starts suffering. Whether that will happen or not is another matter. But of course, the Saudis, the Emirates, many of the other countries, India, China, all these countries will want that, arrive at some kind of a diplomatic solution, stop the fighting, allow the oil and the other trade to flow through, because otherwise everybody is going to be suffering. Of course, will the main protagonists be sensitive to that? It's anybody's guess. I would be extremely surprised if they were. Because I think all sides are taking positions from which it's going to be difficult to back off. Ultimately, if you want a solution, you have to give there has to be some kind of a win-win for everybody. What is it that Iran can be offered at this stage, which will make them say, okay, fine, we are ready to come onto a negotiating table and let bygones be bygones?
Okay,
will they stick to the main conditions that are already being imposed on them? And Absolutely. If not, then how do you move forward?
Let me get in Richard Benkin on that. Richard Benkin, the question is this: A, how do you de-escalate? B, if this does lead to a blocking of the Straits of Hormuz, what really then are we looking at? Because we've seen a considerable presence of the US military. There are aircraft carriers, etc., that are present in the Middle East at this point of time. Is then engaging militarily going to become something that we're going to see as far as the Strait of Hormuz is concerned?
First of all, thank you for having me on. First of all, let me just say in response to the last gentleman's remarks, I don't think anyone in Washington is going to be losing sleep over figuring out how to make it a win-win for the government of Iran. The government of Iran has been an implacable enemy of the United States ever since 1979, and that's not changing. So with regards to that, I actually believe the strikes last night made military escalation less likely. Iran really has few options. It's firing missiles indiscriminately into civilian areas in Israel, which it's been doing. But you don't see other nations jumping in to actually do something to support Iran. And I think that's really what a lot of people are missing. Not only did President Trump take care of the nuclear threat in Iran, but over the last several years, we have seen an axis of authoritarianism formed against freedom-loving peoples and against democracy. And Iran was one important pillar of that axis. And before last night, to a large extent, but certainly after last night, that pillar is gone. And it's been a major blow against the axis of authoritarianism. And I think in the end, that's going to mean less war rather than war. Certainly, I would think the people in Beijing are going to have to think even harder about whether or not to invade Taiwan, given the fact that they know now that the United States is not playing around.
Absolutely. And in fact, let me get in a word from Elon Levi as well. Elon Levi, how do you look at how the situation really is evolving at the moment? Because on ground, Israel, of course, has launched these air offensives. Even today, we've seen 10 locations that have been struck, which are military targets, is what we are told. But, if this does lead to the blocking of the Straits of Hormuz, are we looking at a potential escalation there militarily?
If the Iranian regime decides to block the Straits of Hormuz, it would be its worst strategic mistake since giving Hamas the green light to invade Israel in the October 7th massacre and starting this war. First of all, because if Iran blocks the Straits of Hormuz tonight, it won't have a navy by midnight. Iran has no proxies willing to fight for it. It has increasingly few ballistic missile launchers as Israel attacks them, and no allies coming to its defense. It has no air defenses. And the countries that are currently sitting on the fence and expressing neutrality and calling for de-escalation would certainly back forceful action in order to free the Strait of Hormuz. So that would be a suicidal measure for the Iranian regime. But, Israel is trying here to destroy two existential threats. Not only the Iranian nuclear threat, but also the Iranian ballistic missile threat. Iran was working to manufacture 20,000 ballistic missiles, which is an existential threat for a country as small as Israel. And now, therefore, is not the time to de-escalate and let the Iranian regime go back to rebuilding its proxy armies, go back to trying to enslave the Middle East. Now is the time, as President Trump said, to pressure the Iranian regime to sue for peace and to tell it that its policy of death to Israel and death to America has failed. It's brought ruin to Iran, ruin to the region. It's endangering the regime. And if the surviving leaders who are stuck in bunkers underground know what is good for them, Iran will abandon its aggression and we can have true peace in the Middle East.
Right. Let me bring in Taraktar on that note. Taraktar, even during the peak of the Iran-Iraq war, we never saw the strait completely blocked. If that happens, it will be completely unprecedented, and therefore the kind of responses that you're getting from Israel and others is not entirely unexpected. It will be really ratcheting this up because it's not just Iran, but several of its neighbors who would have the direct impact and the direct fallout of this, economically speaking.
See, I don't see how China is going to allow Iran to do this. China is the largest importer from the Gulf. And any assistance which Iran is getting, which we heard of 2 aircraft bringing in military weapons, if Iran does that, China is going to have a fit. But on the other hand, if China says, no, you can't do this, it's going to have to give Tehran an alternative. I would agree with what the previous gentleman said. Once you lose sovereignty over your airspace, there's really not a lot you can do in conventional terms. You're going to lose out on the Navy, the Air Force, there was no firing at all at this, the aircraft, how many aircraft which came in, nothing, at least that's what the US says. But I am hoping the Houthis will stick to their so-called ceasefire. If they don't, Hamas and Hezbollah have mysteriously disappeared. But this is all temporary. I'm very apprehensive of what's going to happen down the road. I mean, maybe Iran sues for peace, maybe it stops now, but this is a very old civilization. It's not going to take this lying down.
All right, Iran is not going to take this lying down, but also joining us on the panel is Bourjin Wagmar, who's from the Center of Iranian Studies, the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. Bourjin, thanks so much for joining us. This is what the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said, that if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, it would be another terrible mistake and economic suicide. What could be the potential consequences? Several of our panelists before you joined were also warning that if that happens, it will be the worst decision that Iran has made. Do you agree, Bourjin?
Of course, it is economic suicide, and it ought to be writing on the wall to a regime which is facing, insofar as I'm concerned as an Iranist and historian, its Berlin moment. How apposite that we are discussing this during the 80th anniversary of D-Day this very year, as the Allied forces closed in April 45, Tehran is, I repeat, facing its Berlin moment. Make no mistake about that. And that's the long arm of Iranian studies and history, which I am looking at. It may also be important to mention that the straits are jointly controlled with Muscat. Iran doesn't have complete say over the matter in the said straits. And even if the straits were closed, which is a symbolic saber rattling, what of it? Saudi Arabia can transmit oil on the Red Sea through Yanbu, so it's not completely dependent on Ras Tanura and Dammam and Al Khobar, which is in the Persian Gulf. Ditto with the United Arab Emirates and the Fujairah bunker, and even Iran for itself has moved to Jusk, which is further away from the Straits into the Gulf of Oman. So all had factored this in years ago, and the Chinese, who as of April 2025 we're purchasing 740,000 barrels per day, can always look at other OPEC exporters. I mean, and this is an appropriate moment also to mention Chinese reticence, not to mention Putin's, to talk about anything save diplomatic blandishments to support Tehran. None have come to its aid, and none will. Make absolutely no mistake about that.
Okay, let me also bring in fact, Raymond Vicky, a senior associate of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Raymond Vicky, you know, what is really going to be the off-ramp? If there has to be de-escalation, of course, it's not going to be easy, given the kind of positions that we're seeing several of our panelists take, and of course, the positions that have been taken by, in fact, the major players in this entire crisis. But what really is the road ahead? Because this is something that, while Trump has said that there could be more attacks and stronger attacks, what are we looking at in terms of a solution? Because Iran certainly is not going to take all of this lying down. Are we looking then at a potential spreading of the crisis? There are talks of, Iran targeting U.S. military bases in the Middle East, for instance. Are we looking at the situation of this entire matter escalating from here on?
Well, thanks very much for having me. You've put your finger exactly on the question. It's not what happens on day one, it's what happens thereafter that is determinant of whether or not we move from a logic of peace to a logic of war. You know, peace like war must be waged. It's not a one and done situation. The idea that you simply bomb somebody into submission has proven not to be the case in Gaza. We went into Iraq. Initially, people were jubilant about U.S. success there, and we know the long-term consequences. Yes, there needs to be an off-ramp, but at this point, the off-ramps are being foreclosed. It's not a question of whether Iran will retaliate, but how they will retaliate. We've talked about Straits of Hormuz, which has an immediate effect, but a longer-term effect would be the kind of asymmetric warfare which has proven very effective in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Vietnam, in Libya, and has involved the United States and the world in death and destruction more than it wishes to be. What needs to happen, of course, is leadership on both sides that will get back to some semblance of rule of principle, if not of law, of being able to use institutions such as the United Nations and G20 across the board. But the Trump administration has no appetite for this. President Trump's view is transactional. It's focused on his glorifications. So I think we're in for a rough ride, regardless of whether the straits are closed, particularly or not. The fallout is going to be very great in terms of the international economy.
All right. Raymond Vicky made a very important point there. So how much of this is now going to be focused on asymmetric warfare? Even if the straits are not closed or they take some time to arrive at that decision, whatever be the case, there's always the chance of sea mines, of cyber attacks, of harassment of small boats, so on and so forth. All of that is also very much within the realm of possibility, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because Madhav, quite clearly, look, if conventionally a country is not able to fight anymore, but is not willing to capitulate, then what is left for it? We saw that in Afghanistan, didn't we? What happened with all the advantages that the most fearsome military power on earth, which is NATO and the US, what could they do against that ragtag militia for 20 years? Okay, they killed about 200,000 men. And then what happened at the end of it? What were they defeated with? They were defeated with something as little as IEDs and rocket launchers and Kalashnikovs. That is what led to the defeat of the most fearsome military force on earth. Secondly, listen, I don't have a dog in this fight. Okay, I like the Israelis hell of a lot. I know the Iranians and I like them also. So I really don't have a dog in this fight. But let's, when people tell me that you are doing all of this for democracy and freedom, that's a 50-year-old rhetoric. Don't give me that crap. Okay, what did you do in Syria? You brought in Al-Qaeda out there. That's for democracy and freedom. What have you done in Libya? You have got thousands of people killed and complete anarchy in that country. Was that for democracy and freedom? What have you done in Iraq? The country is still not a viable place. Was that for democracy and freedom? Oh yeah, I have no truck for Saddam Hussein. But the point is, you had no alternative. So you let that country go into chaos. Thousands of people got killed. All kinds of dubious elements and the most despicable elements came about. And to talk about this is the Berlin moment or whatever our friend from UK was talking about, are you going to put boots on the ground in Iran? Now, I'm not saying that none of the scenarios that have been painted out here cannot come true. Yes, there can be a complete capitulation. There is a theoretical possibility. Yes, there can be a change, a regime change within the regime. That another faction takes over and things kind of stabilize and they are ready to talk peace until they are strong enough to fight back.
Okay, very important set of points that you're making, Sushant. Let me get in a response from some of our US guests. Dr. Richard Benkin is with us. Dr. Richard Benkin, you want to respond to those comments made by Sushant Sareen, because he says that it's all very well, but let's get this right in terms of what this is actually about, because all this rhetoric of ushering in democracy, etc., we've seen a similar script play out in the past, and it actually hasn't happened the way that we were told, at the time of the attack, at times earlier as well. Dr. Richard Benkin.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I think the comparisons with Afghanistan, Iraq, and such are rather strained. The mistake that my country made, and I think a lot of Americans will agree with this, is that we tried to engage in nation building after the military victory. And in doing so, we didn't take into consideration perhaps all the different factions there. However, this is entirely different. You will not see the American putting boots on the ground to engage in nation building. Iran is a nation that has been around for a long time, doesn't need nation building. Beyond that, there are organizations and people inside Iran, Iranians, who are ready to step up. So I see the role that the United States plays as something of certainly a support role, a leadership role, but not one in which we'll get bogged down engaging in nation building in Iran. I think that's something. I think that's something we have to remember rather than engage in one-to-one, probably simplistic comparisons. Remember also, right before this, the United States showed its dominance with China, for instance, on the economic front. It became very, very clear that China would be in difficulty if the United States pulled all the economic leaders. Now it's adding the military front. And again, I think it's a message to the axis of authoritarian, which, by the way, the axis of authoritarianism is very much contrary to India's interests as well. And I think this was a very strong message that we are not in the same sort of world that we were in before January.
All right. There is, in fact, some news coming in at this point of time. It's an emergency UNSC meet that's been called in the aftermath of the US strikes on Iran. The meeting scheduled to take place past midnight. This meeting remains to be seen, called by Iran and supported by China, Russia and Pakistan is the information coming in. Srinjoy, what's the likely outcome? Because the United States is, of course, as we know, a permanent member. Is it going to veto this entire move? What are you hearing?
Well, there certainly will be a difference of opinion. There will be Iran certainly on one side, Iran supporters, Russia, China, Pakistan, most notably. It's entirely possible that this could be one side, and there could be America and some of the Western powers on the other side, Britain, France, and so on. And it could be an inconclusive meeting, or there will certainly be serious differences of opinion on this.
All right. Thanks so much for that quick update there, Srinjoy. Let me get in Elon Levi. Elon Levi, how do you respond to this particular meeting, or the emergency meeting as it's been called? Of course, likely outcome we don't know at the moment, but certainly, of course, Iran attempting to highlight this issue on the world stage. I think we've lost Elon there. Let me quickly bring in fact, one of our other panelists. Yes, would you like to come in on this, Bourjin Wagmar? What would Iran be hoping to achieve with this?
Well, Iran may like to show that it's calling in a Security Council meet and express its outrage, but it would be better for all of us to realize what really took place. Namely, according to top unnamed Iranian officials, Tehran was intimated of the B-2 bombers coming in and striking the three facilities, and that Washington made it tacitly clear to them that it is only this and nothing more we were going to undertake. So for Arakchi and all to express surprise is, quite frankly, just a show as such. So that needs to be put in context. And insofar as Iran is concerned, it is a nation state. It's not Syria. It's not Lebanon, lines in the sand, or like Libya that were carved up. It has had two revolutions in 1905-06 and 78-79. And yes, the Iranian opposition as we speak is abysmal. In the diaspora, they are utterly chaotic and have no purpose per se except their own access to grind. But it is not to say that they can't be brought in to bear pressure on the regime. Right. And concomitantly, I will also say that nobody is talking of a rosy dawn ushering in the next week or even tomorrow, because yes, if this regime goes and if Khamenei caves in, something far worse in terms of hardline Shia millenarian Islamists could come to power too. And please note that factors in, Madhav, with Khamenei's declaration of three names that were forwarded to the Assembly of Experts, the Majlis Khobragan, which is an extremely unusual move when Article 5 and 109 of the Constitution will be invoked following his either death in harness or if he's incapacitated, in that the names in question are most likely involving not clerics as we've traditionally seen since 1979 and part of the COM establishment, but also uniformed sorts from the Revolutionary Guards who will play a far more important role in times to come.
Very interesting analysis. Very interesting analysis. There's no guarantee that it will usher in a liberal regime. It might be a more conservative, a more fundamentalist one. That's one of the points being made over here. But Taraktar, I want to bring you back to this UNSC resolution. And one of the things that's so stark, I mean, we've seen the statements earlier today, but just look at Pakistan. We saw Asif Munir beating Trump. You saw that recommendation of a Nobel Peace Prize. And now you have the same Pakistan that's criticizing US military action. I mean, it doesn't get more hypocritical or ridiculous than this.
I mean, I was in splits when I heard that Pakistan was also part of this UN Security Council. I mean, the parallels are quite a number, by the way. The fact that even during Operation Sindoor, we said that we were targeting only, terrorist sites, we're targeting only military sites. It looks like a copybook from the US, but the reaction is quite different. We are supposed to have been aggressors, whereas they are doing it in defense of democracy. I mean, we were attacked. Nobody attacked the US. I'm sorry, I find this really strange. But, the dangers here, and I would agree with Sushant on this, Iran is not going to lie down and play dead. This is not a country, this is a country which has taken a lot of, I won't use the appropriate word, but a lot of nonsense over the last several decades. It has the only thing is, it has no friends apart from China and Russia. Russia is sitting back and enjoying the whole show because it does what it wants in Ukraine. China is, Russia is selling more oil than ever before. US is selling more oil, ramped up its own oil production. So who's suffering? But this, like I would say, the chaos created by conventional attacks, it's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
It's going to hit us. All of us are going to get hit in the global south because oil prices, inflation, and the rise of extremism, these are things they created. They leave
Absolutely.
it.
All things that we could very well do without,
and
all things that have been troubling us for the last several years since we've been seeing these recent set of conflicts as well. I'd like to thank all our panelists for joining us. Sushant Sareen, Taraktar, as well as Dr. Richard L. Benkin, Raymond Vicky, as well as Bourjin Wagmar, Elon Levi also, who was joining us earlier. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, ladies and gentlemen.